Chapter 2. Concentration. Its Practice. Verse 1. Mortification, study, and surrendering fruits of work to God are called Kriya Yoga. Those samadhis with which we ended our last chapter are very difficult to attain, so we must take them up slowly. The first step, the preliminary step, is called Kriya Yoga. Literally, this means work, working towards yoga. The organs are the horses, the mind is the rein, the intellect is the charioteer, the soul is the rider, and the body is the chariot. The master of the household, the king, the self of man, is sitting in this chariot. If the horses are very strong and do not obey the rein, if the charioteer, the intellect, does not know how to control the horses, then the chariot will come to grief. But if the organs, the horses, are well controlled, and if the rein, the mind, is well held in the hands of the charioteer, the intellect, the chariot reaches the goal. What is meant, therefore, by this mortification? Holding the rein firmly while guiding the body and the organs, not letting them do anything they like, but keeping them both under proper control. Study. What is meant by study in this case? No study of novels or storybooks, but study of those works which teach the liberation of the soul. Then again, this study does not mean controversial studies at all. The yogi is supposed to have finished his period of controversy. He has had enough of that and has become satisfied. He only studies to intensify his convictions. Vada and Siddhanta, these are the two sorts of scriptural knowledge. Vada, the argumentative, and Siddhanta, the decisive. When a man is entirely ignorant, he takes up the first of these, the argumentative fighting and reasoning pro and con, and when he has finished that, he takes up the Siddhanta, the decisive, arriving at a conclusion. Simply arriving at this conclusion will not do. It must be intensified. Books are infinite in number, and time is short. Therefore, the secret of knowledge is to take what is essential. Take that and try to live up to it. There is an old Indian legend that if you place a cup of milk and water before a Rajahamsa, a swan, he will take all the milk and leave the water. In that way, we should take what is of value in knowledge and leave the dross. Intellectual gymnastics are necessary at first. We must not go blindly into anything. The yogi has passed the argumentative stage and has come to a conclusion, which is, like the rocks, immovable. The only thing he now seeks to do is to intensify that conclusion. Do not argue, he says. If one forces arguments upon you, be silent. Do not answer any argument, but go away calmly, because arguments only disturb the mind. The only thing necessary is to train the intellect. What is the use of disturbing it for nothing? The intellect is but a weak instrument and can give us only knowledge limited by the senses. The yogi wants to go beyond the senses. Therefore, intellect is of no use to him. He is certain of this, and, therefore, is silent and does not argue. Every argument throws his mind out of balance, creates a disturbance in the citta, and a disturbance is a drawback. Argumentations and searchings of the reason are only by the way. There are much higher things beyond them. The whole of life is not for schoolboy fights and debating societies. Surrendering the fruits of work to God is to take to ourselves neither credit nor blame, but to give up both to the Lord and be at peace. Verse 2. It is for the practice of samadhi and minimizing the pain-bearing obstructions. Most of us make our minds like spoiled children, allowing them to do whatever they want. Therefore, it is necessary that Kriya Yoga should be constantly practiced in order to gain control of the mind and bring it into subjection. The obstructions to yoga arise from lack of control and cause us pain. They can only be removed by denying the mind and holding it in check through the means of Kriya Yoga. Verse 3. The pain-bearing obstructions are ignorance, egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. These are the 5 pains, the 5-fold tie that binds us down, of which ignorance is the cause, and the other 4 its effects. It is the only cause of all our misery. What else can make us miserable? The nature of the soul is eternal bliss. What can make it sorrowful except ignorance, hallucination, delusion? All pain of the soul is simply delusion. Verse 4. Ignorance is the productive field of all these that follow, whether they are dormant, attenuated, overpowered, or expanded. Ignorance is the cause of egoism, attachment, aversion, and clinging to life. These impressions exist in different states. They're sometimes dormant. You often hear the expression, innocent as a baby, yet in the baby may be the state of a demon or of a god, which will come out by degrees. In the yogi, these impressions, the samskaras left by past actions, are attenuated, that is, exist in a very fine state, and he can control them and not allow them to become manifest. Overpowered means that sometimes one set of impressions is held down for a while by those that are stronger, but they come out when that repressing cause is removed. The last state is the expanded, when the samskaras, having helpful surroundings, attain to a great activity, either as good or evil. Verse 5. Ignorance is taking the non-eternal, the impure, the painful, and the non-self for the eternal, the pure, the happy, and the Atman or self, respectively. All the different sorts of impressions have one source, ignorance. We have first to learn what ignorance is. All of us think, I am the body, and not the self, the pure, the effulgent, the ever blissful, and that is ignorance. We think of man and see man as body. This is the great delusion. Verse 6. Egoism is the identification of the seer with the instrument of seeing. The seer is really the self, the pure one, the ever-holy, the infinite, the immortal. This is the self of man. And what are the instruments? The chitta or mind stuff, the buddhi or determinative faculty, the manas or mind, and the indriyas or sense organs. These are the instruments for him to see the external world, and the identification of the self with the instruments is what is called the ignorance of egoism. We say, I am the mind, I am thought, I am angry, or I am happy. How can we be angry, and how can we hate? We should identify ourselves with the self that cannot change. If it is unchangeable, how can it be one moment happy and one moment unhappy? It is formless, infinite, omnipresent. What can change it? It is beyond all law. What can affect it? Nothing in the universe can produce an effect on it. Yet, through ignorance, we identify ourselves with the mind stuff and think we feel pleasure or pain. Verse 7. Attachment is that which dwells on pleasure. We find pleasure in certain things, and the mind, like a current, flows towards them. And this following the pleasure center, as it were, is what is called attachment. We are never attached where we do not find pleasure. We find pleasure in very queer things sometimes, but the principle remains. Wherever we find pleasure, there we are attached. Verse 8. Aversion is that which dwells on pain. That which gives us pain, we immediately seek to get away from. Verse 9. Flowing through its own nature and established even in the learned is the clinging to life. This clinging to life you see manifested in every animal. Upon it, many attempts have been made to build the theory of a future life, because men are so fond of life that they desire a future life also. Of course, it goes without saying that this argument is without much value, but the most curious part of it is that in Western countries, the idea that this clinging to life indicates a possibility of future life applies only to men, but does not include animals. In India, this clinging to life has been one of the arguments to prove past experience and existence. For instance, if it be true that all our knowledge has come from experience, then it is sure that that which we never experienced we cannot imagine or understand. As soon as chickens are hatched, they begin to pick up food. Many times it has been seen where ducks have been hatched by hens that as soon as they come out of the eggs, they flew to water, and the mother thought they would be drowned. If experience be the only source of knowledge, where did these chickens learn to pick up food, or the ducklings that the water was their natural element? If you say it is instinct, it means nothing. It is simply giving a word, but is no explanation. What is this instinct? We have many instincts in ourselves. For instance, most of you ladies play the piano, and remember when you first learned how carefully you had to put your fingers on the black and the white keys, one after the other, but now, after long years of practice, you can talk with your friends while your fingers play mechanically. It has become instinct. So with every work we do. By practice, it becomes instinct. It becomes automatic. But so far as we know, all the cases which we now regard as automatic are degenerated reason. In the language of the yogi, instinct is involved reason. Discrimination becomes involved and gets to be automatic samskaras. Therefore, it is perfectly logical to think that all we call instinct in this world is simply involved reason. As reason cannot come without experience, all instinct is, therefore, the result of past experience. Chickens feared the hawk, and ducklings loved the water. These are both the results of past experience. Then the question is whether that experience belongs to a particular soul or to the body simply, whether this experience which comes to the duck is the duck's forefather's experience or the duck's own experience. Modern scientific men hold that it belongs to the body, but the yogis hold that it is the experience of the mind, transmitted through the body. This is called the theory of reincarnation. We have seen that all our knowledge, whether we call it perception or reason or instinct, must come through that one channel called experience, and all that we now call instinct is the result of past experience degenerated into instinct, and that instinct regenerates into reason again. So on throughout the universe, and upon this has been built one of the chief arguments for reincarnation in India. The recurring experiences of various spheres in course of time produce this clinging to life. That is why the child is instinctively afraid, because the past experience of pain is there in it. Even in the most learned men who know that this body will go and who say, "Never mind, we've had hundreds of bodies, the soul cannot die," even in them, with all their intellectual convictions, we still find this clinging on to life. Why is this clinging to life? We have seen that it has become instinctive. In the psychological language of the yogis, it has become a samskara. The samskaras, fine and hidden, are sleeping in the chitta. All this past experience of death, all that which we call instinct, is experience become subconscious. It lives in the chitta and is not inactive, but is working underneath. The chitta vrittis, the mind waves, which are gross, we can appreciate and feel. They can be more easily controlled. But what about the finer instincts? How can they be controlled? When I am angry, my whole mind becomes a huge wave of anger. I feel it, see it, handle it, can easily manipulate it, can fight with it, but I shall not succeed perfectly in the fight until I can get down below to its causes. A man says something very harsh to me, and I begin to feel that I'm getting heated. And he goes on till I'm perfectly angry and forget myself, identify myself with anger. When he first began to abuse me, I thought, I am going to be angry. Anger was one thing, and I was another. But when I became angry, I was anger. These feelings have to be controlled in the germ, the root, in their fine forms, before even we have become conscious that they are acting on us. With the vast majority of mankind, the fine states of these passions are not even known, the states in which they emerge from subconsciousness. When a bubble is rising from the bottom of the lake, we do not see it, nor even when it is nearly come to the surface. It is only when it bursts and makes a ripple that we know it is there. We shall only be successful in grappling with the waves when we can get hold of them in their fine causes, and until you can get hold of them and subdue them before they become gross, there is no hope of conquering any passion perfectly. To control our passions, we have to control them at their very roots. Then alone shall we be able to burn out their very seeds. As fried seeds thrown into the ground will never come up, so these passions will never arise. Verse 10. The fine samskaras are to be conquered by resolving them into their causal state. Samskaras are the subtle impressions that manifest themselves into gross forms later on. How are these fine samskaras to be controlled? By resolving the effect into its cause. When the chitta, which is an effect, is resolved into its cause, asmita or egoism, then only the fine impressions die along with it. Meditation cannot destroy these. Verse 11. By meditation, their gross modifications are to be rejected. Meditation is one of the great means of controlling the rising of these waves. By meditation, you can make the mind subdue these waves And if you go on practicing meditation for days and months and years, until it has become a habit, until it will come in spite of yourself, anger and hatred will be controlled and checked. Verse 12. The receptacle of works has its root in these pain-bearing obstructions, and their experience is in this visible life, or in the unseen life. By the receptacle of works is meant the sum total of samskaras, or impressions. Whatever work we do, the mind is thrown into a wave, and after the work is finished, we think the wave is gone. No, it has only become fine, but it is still there. When we try to remember the work, it comes up again and becomes a wave. So it was there. If not, there would not have been memory. Thus, every action, every thought, good or bad, just goes down and becomes fine, and is there stored up. Both happy and unhappy thoughts are called pain-bearing obstructions, because according to the yogis, they, in the long run, bring pain. All happiness which comes from the senses will eventually bring pain. All enjoyment will make us thirst for more, and that brings pain as its result. There is no limit to man's desires. He goes on desiring, and when he comes to a point where desire cannot be fulfilled, the result is pain. Therefore, the yogis regard the sum total of the impressions, good or evil, as pain-bearing obstructions. They obstruct the way to freedom of the soul. It is the same with the samskaras, the fine roots of all our works. They are the causes which will again bring effects, either in this life or in the lives to come. In exceptional cases, when these samskaras are very strong, they bear fruit quickly. Exceptional acts of wickedness or of goodness bring their fruits even in this life. The yogis hold that men who are able to acquire a tremendous power of good samskaras do not have to die, but even in this life can change their bodies into God bodies. There are several such cases mentioned by the yogis in their books. These men change the very material of their bodies. They rearrange the molecules in such fashion that they have no more sickness, and what we call death does not come to them. Why should not this be? The physiological meaning of food is assimilation of energy from the sun. The energy has reached the plant is eaten by an animal, and the animal by man. The science of it is that we take so much energy from the sun and make it part of ourselves. That being the case, why should there be only one way of assimilating energy? The plant's way is not the same as ours. The earth's process of assimilating energy differs from our own. But all assimilate energy in some form or other. The yogis say that they are able to assimilate energy by the power of the mind alone, that they can draw in as much of it as they desire without recourse to the ordinary methods. As a spider makes its web out of its own substance and becomes bound in it, and cannot go anywhere except along the lines of that web, so we have projected out of our own substance this network called the nerves, and we cannot work except through the channels of those nerves. The yogi says we need not be bound by that. Similarly, we can send electricity to any part of the world, but we have to send it by means of wires. Nature can send a vast mass of electricity without any wires at all. Why cannot we do the same? We can send mental electricity. What we call mind is very much the same as electricity. It is clear that this nerve fluid has some amount of electricity because it is polarized and it answers all electrical directions. We can only send our electricity through these nerve channels. Why not send the mental electricity without this aid? The yogis say it is perfectly possible and practicable, and that when you can do that, you will work all over the universe. You will be able to work with any body, anywhere, without the help of the nervous system. When the soul is acting through these channels, we say a man is living, and when these cease to work, a man is said to be dead. But when a man is able to act either with or without these channels, birth and death will have no meaning for him. All the bodies in the universe are made up of tanmatras. Their difference lies in the arrangement of the latter. If you are the arranger, you can arrange a body in one way or another. Who makes up this body but you? Who eats the food? If another ate the food for you, you would not live long. Who makes the blood out of food? You, certainly. Who purifies the blood and sends it through the veins? You. We are the masters of the body, and we live in it. Only we have lost the knowledge of how to rejuvenate it. We have become automatic, degenerate. We have forgotten the process of arranging its molecules. So, what we do automatically has to be done knowingly. We are the masters, and we have to regulate that arrangement. And as soon as we can do that, we shall be able to rejuvenate just as we like, and then we shall have neither birth, nor disease, nor death. Verse 13. The root being there, the fruition comes in the form of species, life, and experience of pleasure and pain. The roots, the causes, the samskaras, being there, they manifest and form the effects. The cause, dying down, becomes the effect. The effect, getting subtler, becomes the cause of the next effect. A tree bears a seed, which becomes the cause of another tree, and so on. All our works now are the effects of past samskaras. Again, these works becoming samskaras will be the causes of future actions, and thus we go on. So, this aphorism says that the cause being there, the fruit must come, in the form of species of beings. One will be a man, another an angel, another an animal, another a demon. Then there are different effects of karma in life. One man lives 50 years, another 100, another dies in 2 years and never attains maturity. All these differences in life are regulated by past karma. One man is born, as it were, for pleasure. If he buries himself in a forest, pleasure will follow him there. Another man, wherever he goes, is followed by pain. Everything becomes painful for him. It is the result of their own past. According to the philosophy of the yogis, all virtuous actions bring pleasure, and all vicious actions bring pain. Any man who does wicked deeds is sure to reap their fruit in the form of pain. Verse 14. They bear fruit as pleasure or pain, caused by virtue or vice. Verse 15. To the discriminating, all is painful on account of everything bringing pain, either as consequence, or as anticipation of loss of happiness, or as fresh craving arising from impressions of happiness, and also as counteraction of qualities. The yogis say that the man who has discriminating powers, the man of good sense, sees through all that are called pleasure and pain, and knows that they come to all, and that one follows and melts into the other. He sees that men follow a dream all their lives, and never succeed in fulfilling their desires. The great king Yudhishthira once said that the most wonderful thing in life is that every moment we see people dying around us, and yet we think we shall never die. Surrounded by fools on every side, we think we are the only exceptions, the only learned men. Surrounded by all sorts of experiences of fickleness, we think our love is the only lasting love. How can that be? Even love is selfish, and the yogi says that in the end we shall find that even the love of husbands and wives and children and friends slowly decays. Decadence seizes everything in this life. It is only when everything, even love, fails, that with a flash man finds out how vain, how dreamlike is this world. Then he catches a glimpse of vairagya, renunciation, catches a glimpse of the beyond. It is only by giving up this world that the other comes, never through holding on to this one. Never yet was there a great soul who had not to reject sense pleasures and enjoyments to acquire his greatness. The cause of misery is the clash between the different forces of nature, one dragging one way and another dragging another, rendering permanent happiness impossible. Verse 16. The misery which is not yet come is to be avoided. Some karma we have worked out already, some we are working out now in the present, and some are waiting to bear fruit in the future. The first kind is past and gone. The second we will have to work out, and it is only that which is waiting to bear fruit in the future that we can conquer and control, towards which end all our forces should be directed. This is what Patanjali means when he says that samskaras are to be controlled by resolving them into their causal state in verse 10. Verse 17. The concentration called right knowledge is that which is followed by reasoning, discrimination, bliss, and unqualified egoism. Samadhi is divided into two varieties. One is called the samprajñāta and the other the asamprajñāta. In the samprajñāta samadhi come all the powers of controlling nature. It is of four varieties. The first variety is called the savitarka, when the mind meditates upon an object again and again by isolating it from other objects. There are two sorts of objects for meditation in the 25 categories of the Samkhyas. One, the 24 insentient categories of nature, and two, the one sentient Purusha. This part of yoga is based entirely on Samkhya philosophy, about which I have already told you. As you will remember, egoism and will and mind have a common basis, the chitta or the mind stuff, out of which they are all manufactured. The mind stuff takes in the forces of nature and projects them as thought. There must be something again where both force and matter are one. This is called avyakta, the unmanifested state of nature before creation, and to which, after the end of a cycle, the whole of nature returns, to come out again after another period. Beyond that is the Purusha, the essence of intelligence. Knowledge is power, and as soon as we begin to know a thing, we get power over it. So also when the mind begins to meditate on the different elements, it gains power over them. That sort of meditation, where the external gross elements are the objects, is called savitarka. Vitarka means question. Savitarka, with question, questioning the elements, as it were, that they may give their truths and their powers to the man who meditates upon them. There is no liberation in getting powers. It is a worldly search after enjoyments, and there is no enjoyment in this life. All search for enjoyment is vain. This is the old, old lesson which man finds so hard to learn. When he does learn it, he gets out of the universe and becomes free. The possession of what are called occult powers is only intensifying the world, and in the end, intensifying suffering. Though as a scientist, Patanjali is bound to point out the possibilities of this science, he never misses an opportunity to warn us against these powers. Again, in the very same meditation, when one struggles to take the elements out of time and space, and think of them as they are, it is called nirvitarka, without question. When the meditation goes a step higher, and takes the tanmatras as its object, and thinks of them as in time and space, it is called savichara, with discrimination. And when, in the same meditation, one eliminates time and space, and thinks of the fine elements as they are, it is called nirvichara, without discrimination. The next step is when the elements are given up, both gross and fine, and the object of meditation is the interior organ, the thinking organ. When the thinking organ is thought of as bereft of the qualities of activity and dullness, it is then called Sananda, the blissful samadhi. When the mind itself is the object of meditation, when meditation becomes very ripe and concentrated, when all ideas of the gross and fine materials are given up, when the sattva state only of the ego remains, but differentiated from all other objects, it is called sasmita samadhi. The man who has attained to this has attained to what is called in the Vedas bereft of body. He can think of himself as without his gross body, but he will have to think of himself as with a fine body. Those that in this state get merged in nature without attaining the goal are called prakritilayas, but those who do not stop even there reach the goal, which is freedom. Verse 18. There is another samadhi which is attained by the constant practice of cessation of all mental activity, in which the citta retains only the unmanifested impressions. This is the perfect, superconscious, asampragnata samadhi, the state which gives us freedom. The first state does not give us freedom, does not liberate the soul. A man may attain to all powers and yet fall again. There is no safeguard until the soul goes beyond nature. It is very difficult to do so, although the method seems easy. The method is to meditate on the mind itself, and whenever thought comes, to strike it down, allowing no thought to come into the mind, thus making it an entire vacuum. When we can really do this, that very moment we shall attain liberation. When persons without training and preparation try to make their minds vacant, they are likely to succeed only in covering themselves with tamas, the material of ignorance, which makes the mind dull and stupid, and leads them to think that they are making a vacuum of the mind. To be able to really do that is to manifest the greatest strength, the highest control. When this state, asamprajñāta, superconsciousness, is reached, the samadhi becomes seedless. What is meant by that? In a concentration where there is consciousness, where the mind succeeds only in quelling the waves in the citta and holding them down, the waves remain in the form of tendencies. These tendencies, or seeds, become waves again when the time comes. But when you have destroyed all these tendencies, almost destroyed the mind, then the samadhi becomes seedless. There are no more seeds in the mind out of which to manufacture again and again this plant of life, this ceaseless round of birth and death. You may ask, what state would that be in which there is no mind, there is no knowledge? What we call knowledge is a lower state than the one beyond knowledge. You must always bear in mind that the extremes look very much alike. If a very low vibration of ether is taken as darkness, an intermediate state is light, very high vibration will be darkness again. Similarly, ignorance is the lowest state, knowledge is the middle state, and beyond knowledge is the highest state, the two extremes of which seem the same. Knowledge itself is a manufactured something, a combination. It is not reality. What is the result of constant practice of this higher concentration? All old tendencies of restlessness and dullness will be destroyed, as well as the tendencies of goodness too. The case is similar to that of the chemicals used to take the dirt and alloy off gold. When the ore is smelted down, the dross is burnt along with the chemicals. So this constant controlling power will stop the previous bad tendencies, and eventually the good ones also. Those good and evil tendencies will suppress each other, leaving alone the soul in its own splendor, untrammeled by either good or bad, the omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Then the man will know that he had neither birth nor death, nor need for heaven or earth. He will know that he neither came nor went. It was nature which was moving, and that movement was reflected upon the soul. The form of the light reflected by the glass upon the wall moves, and the wall foolishly thinks it is moving. So with all of us. It is the citta, the mind stuff, constantly moving, making itself into various forms, and we think that we are these various forms. All these delusions will vanish. When that free soul will command, not pray or beg, but command, then whatever it desires will be immediately fulfilled. Whatever it wants, it will be able to do. According to the Samkhya philosophy, there is no God. It says that there can be no God of this universe, because if there were one, he must be a soul, and a soul must be either bound or free. How can the soul that is bound by nature, or controlled by nature, create? It is itself a slave. On the other hand, why should the soul that is free create and manipulate all these things? It has no desires, so it cannot have any need to create. Secondly, it says the theory of God is an unnecessary one. Nature explains all. What is the use of any God? But Kapila teaches that there are many souls who, though nearly attaining perfection, fall short because they cannot perfectly renounce all powers. Their minds for a time merge in nature to re-emerge as its masters. Such gods there are. We shall all become such gods, and, according to the Samkhyas, the God spoken of in the Vedas really means one of these free souls. Beyond them, there is not an eternally free and blessed creator of the universe. On the other hand, the yogis say, not so, there is a God. There is one soul separate from all other souls, and he is the eternal master of all creation, the ever-free, the teacher of all teachers. The yogis admit that those whom the Samkhyas call the merged in nature also exist. They are yogis who have fallen short of perfection, and though for a time debarred from attaining the goal, remain as rulers of part of the universe. Verse 19. This samadhi, when not followed by extreme non-attachment, becomes the cause of the re-manifestation of the gods and of those that become merged in nature. The gods in the Indian systems of philosophy represent certain high offices which are filled successively by various souls, but none of them is perfect. Verse 20. To others, this samadhi comes through faith, energy, memory, concentration, and discrimination of the real. These are they who do not want the position of gods or even that of rulers of cycles. They attain to liberation. Verses 21 through 24. Success is speedy for the extremely energetic. The success of yogis differs according as the means they adopt are mild, medium, or intense, or by devotion to Ishvara. Ishvara, the supreme ruler, is a special Purusha, or soul, untouched by misery, actions, their results, and desires. We must again remember that the Patanjala Yoga philosophy is based upon the Samkhya philosophy. Only in the latter there is no place for God, while with the yogis God has a place. The yogis, however, do not mention many ideas about God, such as creating. God as the creator of the universe is not meant by the Ishvara of the yogis. According to the Vedas, Ishvara is the creator of the universe. Because it is harmonious, it must be the manifestation of one will. The yogis want to establish a God, but they arrive at him in a peculiar fashion of their own. They say, verse 25, in him becomes infinite that all-knowingness which in others is only a germ. The mind must always travel between two extremes. You can think of limited space, but that very idea gives you also unlimited space. Close your eyes and think of a little space. At the same time that you perceive the little circle, you have a circle round it of unlimited dimensions. It's the same with time. Try to think of a second. You will have, with the same act of perception, to think of time which is unlimited. So with knowledge. Knowledge is only a germ in man, but you'll have to think of infinite knowledge around it, so that the very constitution of our mind shows us that there is unlimited knowledge, and the yogis call that unlimited knowledge God. Verse 26. He is the teacher of even the ancient teachers, being not limited by time. It is true that all knowledge is within ourselves, but this has to be called forth by another knowledge. Although the capacity to know is inside us, it must be called out, and that calling out of knowledge can only be done, a yogi maintains, through another knowledge. Dead, insentient matter never calls out knowledge. It is the action of knowledge that brings out knowledge. Knowing beings must be with us to call forth what is in us. So these teachers were always necessary. The world was never without them, and no knowledge can come without them. God is the teacher of all teachers, because these teachers, however great they may have been, gods or angels, were all bound and limited by time, while God is not. There are two peculiar deductions of the yogis. The first is that in thinking of the limited, the mind must think of the unlimited, and that if one part of that perception is true, so also must the other be, for the reason that their value as perceptions of the mind is equal. The very fact that man has a little knowledge shows that God has unlimited knowledge. If I'm to take one, why not the other? Reason forces me to take both or reject both. If I believe that there is a man with a little knowledge, I must also admit that there is someone behind him with unlimited knowledge. The second deduction is that no knowledge can come without a teacher. It is true, as the modern philosophers say, that there is something in man which evolves out of him. All knowledge is in man, but certain environments are necessary to call it out. We cannot find any knowledge without teachers. If there are men teachers, God teachers, or angel teachers, they are all limited. Who was the teacher before them? We are forced to admit, as a last conclusion, one teacher who is not limited by time, and that one teacher of infinite knowledge, without beginning or end, is called God. Verse 27. His manifesting word is Om. Every idea that you have in the mind has a counterpart in a word. The word and the thought are inseparable. The external part of one and the same thing is what we call word, and the internal part is what we call thought. No man can, by analysis, separate thought from word. The idea that language was created by men, certain men sitting together and deciding upon words, has been proved to be wrong. So long as man has existed, there have been words and language. What is the connection between an idea and a word? Although we see that there must always be a word with a thought, it is not necessary that the same thought requires the same word. The thought may be the same in 20 different countries, yet the language is different. We must have a word to express each thought, but these words need not necessarily have the same sound. Sounds will vary in different nations. Our commentator says, although the relation between thought and word is perfectly natural, yet it does not mean a rigid connection between one sound and one idea. These sounds vary, yet the relation between the sounds and the thoughts is a natural one. The connection between thoughts and sounds is good only if there be a real connection between the thing signified and the symbol. Until then, that symbol will never come into general use. A symbol is the manifestor of the thing signified, and if the thing signified has already an existence, and if, by experience, we know that the symbol has expressed that thing many times, then we are sure that there is a real relation between them. Even if the things are not present, there will be thousands who will know them by their symbols. There must be a natural connection between the symbol and the thing signified. Then, when that symbol is pronounced, it recalls the thing signified. The commentator says, the manifesting word of God is Om. Why does he emphasize this word? There are hundreds of words for God. One thought is connected with 1,000 words. The idea God is connected with hundreds of words, and each one stands as a symbol for God. Very good. But there must be a generalization among all these words, some substratum, some common ground of all these symbols, and that which is the common symbol will be the best and will really represent them all. In making a sound, we use the larynx and the palate as a sounding board. Is there any material sound of which all other sounds must be manifestations, one which is the most natural sound? Om is such a sound, the basis of all sounds. The first letter, A, is the root sound, the key, pronounced without touching any part of the tongue or palate. M represents the last sound in the series, being produced by the closed lips, and the U rolls from the very root to the end of the sounding board of the mouth. Thus, Om represents the whole phenomena of sound producing. As such, it must be the natural symbol, the matrix of all the various sounds. It denotes the whole range and possibility of all the words that can be made. Apart from these speculations, we see that around this word Om are centered all the different religious ideas in India. All the various religious ideas of the Vedas have gathered themselves round this word Om. What is that to do with America and England or any other country? Simply this, that the word has been retained at every stage of religious growth in India, and it has been manipulated to mean all the various ideas about God. Monists, dualists, monodualists, separatists, and even atheists take up this Om. Om has become the one symbol for the religious aspiration of the vast majority of human beings. Take, for instance, the English word God. It covers only a limited function, and if you go beyond it, you have to add adjectives to make it personal, or impersonal, or absolute God. So with the words for God in every other language, their signification is very small. This word, Om, however, has around it all the various significances. As such, it should be accepted by everyone. Verse 28. The repetition of this Om and meditating on its meaning is the way. Why should there be repetition? We have not forgotten the theory of samskaras, that the sum total of impressions lives in the mind. They become more and more latent but remain there, and as soon as they get the right stimulus, they come out. Molecular vibration never ceases. When this universe is destroyed, all the massive vibrations disappear. The sun, moon, stars, and earth melt down, but the vibrations remain in the atoms. Each atom performs the same function as the big worlds do. So even when the vibrations of the chitta, or mind stuff, subside, its molecular vibrations go on, and when they get the impulse, come out again. We can now understand what is meant by repetition. It is the greatest stimulus that can be given to the spiritual samskaras. One moment of company with the holy makes a ship to cross this ocean of life. Such is the power of association. So this repetition of Om and thinking of its meaning is keeping good company in your own mind. Study and then meditate on what you have studied. Thus, light will come to you. The self will become manifest. But one must think of Om and of its meaning too. Avoid evil company, because the scars of old wounds are in you, and evil company is just the thing that is necessary to call them out. In the same way, we are told that good company will call out the good impressions that are in us, but which have become latent. There is nothing holier in the world than to keep good company, because the good impressions will then tend to come to the surface. Verse 29. From that is gained the knowledge of introspection and the destruction of obstacles. The first manifestation of the repetition and thinking of Om is that the introspective power will manifest more and more, and all the mental and physical obstacles will begin to vanish. What are the obstacles to the yogi? Verse 30. Disease, mental laziness, doubt, lack of enthusiasm, lethargy, clinging to sense enjoyments, false perception, non-attaining concentration, and falling away from the state when obtained are the obstructing distractions. Disease. This body is the boat which will carry us to the other shore of the ocean of life. It must be taken care of. Unhealthy persons cannot be yogis. Mental laziness makes us lose all lively interest in the subject, without which there will neither be the will nor the energy to practice. Doubts will arise in the mind about the truth of the science, however strong one's intellectual conviction may be, until certain peculiar psychic experiences come, as hearing or seeing at a distance, etc. These glimpses strengthen the mind and make the student persevere. Falling away from the state when obtained. Some days or weeks when you are practicing, the mind will be calm and easily concentrated, and you will find yourself progressing fast. All of a sudden the progress will stop one day, and you'll find yourself, as it were, stranded. Persevere. All progress proceeds by such rise and fall. Verse 31. Grief, mental distress, tremor of the body, and irregular breathing accompany non-retention of concentration. Concentration will bring perfect repose to mind and body every time it is practiced. When the practice has been misdirected or not enough controlled, these disturbances come. Repetition of Om and self-surrender to the Lord will strengthen the mind and bring fresh energy. The nervous shakings will come to almost everyone. Do not mind them at all, but keep on practicing. Practice will cure them and make the seat firm. Verse 32. To remedy this, the practice of one subject should be made. Making the mind take the form of one object for some time will destroy these obstacles. This is general advice. In the following aphorisms, it will be expanded and particularized. As one practice cannot suit everyone, various methods will be advanced, and everyone, by actual experience, will find out that which helps him most. Verse 33. Friendship, mercy, gladness, and indifference, being thought of in regard to subjects happy, unhappy, good, and evil respectively, pacify the citta. We must have these four sorts of ideas. We must have friendship for all. We must be merciful towards those that are in misery. When people are happy, we ought to be happy, and to the wicked we must be indifferent. So with all subjects that come before us. If the subject is a good one, we shall feel friendly towards it. If the subject of thought is one that's miserable, we must be merciful towards it. If it is good, we must be glad. If it is evil, we must be indifferent. These attitudes of the mind towards the different subjects that come before it will make the mind peaceful. Most of our difficulties in our daily lives come from being unable to hold our minds in this way. For instance, if a man does evil to us, instantly we want to react evil, and every reaction of evil shows that we are not able to hold the citta or mind stuff down. It comes out in waves towards the object, and we lose our power. Every reaction in the form of hatred or evil is so much loss to the mind, and every evil thought or deed of hatred or any thought of reaction, if it is controlled, will be laid in our favor. It is not that we lose by thus restraining ourselves. We are gaining infinitely more than we suspect. Each time we suppress hatred or a feeling of anger, it is so much good energy stored up in our favor, that piece of energy will be converted into the higher powers. And when the cycle begins, this prana begins to manifest itself. It is this prana that is manifested as motion, as the nervous motion in human beings or animals, and the same prana is manifesting as thought, and so on. The whole universe is a combination of prana and akasha. So is the human body. Out of akasha, you get the different materials that you feel and see, and out of prana, all the various forces. Now this throwing out and restraining the prana is what is called pranayama. Patanjali, the father of yoga philosophy, does not give very many particular directions about pranayama, but later on, other yogis found out various things about this pranayama and made of it a great science. With Patanjali, it is one of the many ways, but he does not lay much stress on it. He means that you simply throw the air out and draw it in and hold it for some time. That is all. And by that, the mind will become a little calmer. But later on, you will find that out of this is evolved a particular science called pranayama. We shall hear a little of what these later yogis have to say. Some of this I've told you before, but a little repetition will serve to fix it in your minds. First, you must remember that this prana is not the breath, but that which causes the motion of the breath, that which is the vitality of the breath. That is the prana. Again, the word prana is used for all the senses. They are all called pranas. The mind is called prana, and so we see that prana is a force. And yet, we cannot call it force because force is only the manifestation of it. It is that which manifests itself as force and everything else in the way of motion. The chitta, the mind stuff, is the engine which draws in the prana from the surroundings and manufactures out of prana the various vital forces, those that keep the body in preservation, and thought, will, and all other powers. By the above-mentioned process of breathing, we can control all the various motions in the body and the various nerve currents that are running through the body. First, we begin to recognize them, and then we slowly get control over them. Now, these later yogis consider that there are three main currents of this prana in the human body. One they call ira, another pingala, and the third sushumna. Pingala, according to them, is on the right side of the spinal column, and the ira on the left, and in the middle of the spinal column is the sushumna, an empty channel. Ira and pingala, according to them, are the currents working in every man, and through these currents we are performing all the functions of life. Sushumna is present in all as a possibility, but it works only in the yogi. You must remember that yoga changes the body. As you go on practicing, your body changes. It is not the same body that you had before the practice. That is very rational and can be explained because every new thought that we have must make, as it were, a new channel through the brain, and that explains the tremendous conservatism of human nature. Human nature likes to run through the ruts that are already there because it's easy. If we think, just for example's sake, that the mind is like a needle and the brain substance a soft lump before it, then each thought that we have makes a street, as it were, in the brain, and this street would close up but for the gray matter which comes and makes a lining to keep it separate. If there were no gray matter, there would be no memory, because memory means going over these old streets, retracing a thought, as it were. Now perhaps you have marked that when one talks on subjects in which one takes a few ideas that are familiar to everyone and combines and recombines them, it is easy to follow because these channels are present in everyone's brain, and it is only necessary to refer to them. But whenever a new subject comes, new channels have to be made, so it is not understood readily. And that is why the brain, it is the brain and not the people themselves, refuses unconsciously to be acted upon by new ideas. It resists. The prana is trying to make new channels, and the brain will not allow it. This is the secret of conservatism. The fewer channels there have been in the brain, and the less the needle of the prana has made these passages, the more conservative will be the brain, the more it will struggle against new thoughts. The more thoughtful the man, the more complicated will be the streets in his brain, and the more easily he will take to new ideas and understand them. So, with every fresh idea, we make a new impression in the brain, cut new channels through the brain stuff, and that is why we find that in the practice of yoga, it being an entirely new set of thoughts and motives, there is so much physical resistance at first. That is why we find that the part of religion which deals with the world side of nature is so widely accepted, while the other part, the philosophy or the psychology, which deals with the inner nature of man, is so frequently neglected. We must remember the definition of this world of ours. It is only the infinite existence projected into the plane of consciousness. A little of the infinite is projected into consciousness, and that we call our world. So there is an infinite beyond, and religion has to deal with both, with the little lump we call our world, and with the infinite beyond. Any religion which deals with only one of these two will be defective. It must deal with both. The part of religion which deals with the part of the infinite which has come into the plane of consciousness got itself caught, as it were, in the plane of consciousness, in the cage of time, space, and causation, is quite familiar to us, because we are in that already, and ideas about this world have been with us almost from time immemorial. The part of religion which deals with the infinite beyond comes entirely new to us, and getting ideas about it produces new channels in the brain, disturbing the whole system, and that is why you find in the practice of yoga, ordinary people are at first turned out of their grooves. In order to lessen these disturbances as much as possible, all these methods are devised by Patanjali that we may practice any one of them best suited to us. Verse 35. Those forms of concentration that bring extraordinary sense perceptions cause perseverance of the mind. This naturally comes with dharana, or concentration. The yogis say, if the mind becomes concentrated on the tip of the nose, one begins to smell, after a few days, wonderful perfumes. If it becomes concentrated to the root of the tongue, one begins to hear sounds. If on the tip of the tongue, one begins to taste wonderful flavors. If on the middle of the tongue, one feels as if one were coming in contact with something. If one concentrates one's mind on the palate, one begins to see peculiar things. If a man whose mind is disturbed wants to take up some of these practices of yoga, yet doubts the truth of them, he will have his doubts set at rest when, after a little practice, these things come to him, and he will persevere. Verse 36. Or by the meditation on the effulgent light, which is beyond all sorrow. This is another sort of concentration. Think of the lotus of the heart, with petals downwards, and running through it the sushumna, or middle channel. Take in the breath, and while throwing the breath out, imagine that the lotus is turned with the petals upwards, and inside that lotus is an effulgent light. Meditate on that. Verse 37. Or by meditation on the heart that has given up all attachment to sense objects. Take some holy person, some great person whom you revere, some saint whom you know to be perfectly non-attached, and think of his heart. That heart has become non-attached. and meditate on that heart. It will calm the mind. If you cannot do that, there is the next way. Verse 38, or by meditating on the knowledge that comes in sleep. Sometimes a man dreams that he has seen angels coming to him and talking to him, that he is in an ecstatic condition, that he has heard music floating through the air. He is in a blissful condition in that dream, and when he wakes, it makes a deep impression on him. Think of that dream as real and meditate upon it. If you cannot do that, meditate on any holy thing that pleases you. Verse 39, or by the meditation on anything that appeals to one as good. This does not mean any wicked subject, but anything good that you like, any place that you like best, any scenery that you like best, any idea that you like best, anything that will concentrate the mind. Verse 40, the yogi's mind, thus meditating, becomes unobstructed from the atomic to the infinite. The mind, by this practice, easily contemplates the most minute as well as the biggest thing. Thus, the mind waves become fainter. Verse 41, the yogi, whose vrittis have thus become controlled, sees in the receiver, the receiving, and the received, concentratedness and sameness, like a crystal before differently colored objects. What results from this constant meditation? We must first remember how in a previous aphorism, Patanjali went into the various states of meditation, how the first would be the gross, the second the fine, and from them the advance was to still finer objects. The result of these meditations is that we can meditate as easily on the fine as on the gross objects. Here, the yogi sees the three things, the receiver, the received, and the receiving instrument, corresponding to the soul, the external objects, and the mind. There are three objects of meditation given us. First, the gross things, as bodies or material objects. Second, fine things, as the mind, the chitta. And third, the Purusha qualified, not the Purusha itself, but the egoism. By practice, the yogi gets established in all these meditations. Whenever he meditates, he can keep out all other thoughts. He becomes identified with that on which he meditates. When he meditates, he is like a piece of crystal. Before flowers, the crystal becomes almost identified with the flowers. If the flower is red, the crystal looks red. If the flower is blue, the crystal looks blue. Verse 42, sound, meaning, and resulting knowledge being mixed up is called samadhi with question. Sound here means vibration, meaning the nerve currents which conduct it. And knowledge means reaction. All the various meditations we have had so far, Patanjali calls sa-vitarka, meditation with question. Later on, he gives us higher and higher dhyanas. In these that are called with question, we keep the duality of subject and object, which results from the mixture of word, meaning, and knowledge. There is first the external vibration, the word. This, carried inward by the sense currents, is the meaning. After that, there comes a reactionary wave in the chitta, which is knowledge. But the mixture of these three makes up what we call knowledge. In all the meditations up to this, we get this mixture as objects of meditation. The next samadhi is higher. Verse 43. The samadhi, called without question, comes when the memory is purified, or devoid of qualities, expressing only the meaning of the meditated object. It is by the practice of meditation of these three that we come to the state where these three do not mix. We can get rid of them. We will first try to understand what these three are. Here is the chitta, or mind stuff. You will always remember the simile of the mind stuff to a lake, and the vibration, the word, the sound, like a pulsation coming over it. You have that calm lake in you, and I pronounce a word, cow. As soon as it enters through your ears, there is a wave produced in your chitta along with it. So that wave represents the idea of the cow, the form or the meaning as we call it. The apparent cow that you know is really the wave in the mind stuff that comes as a reaction to the internal and external sound vibrations. With the sound, the wave dies away. It can never exist without a word. You may ask how it is when we only think of the cow and do not hear a sound. You make that sound yourself. You are saying cow faintly in your mind, and with that comes a wave. There cannot be any wave without this impulse of sound. And when it is not from outside, it is from inside. And when the sound dies, the wave dies. What remains? The result of the reaction, and that is knowledge. These three are so closely combined in our mind that we cannot separate them. When the sound comes, the senses vibrate, and the wave rises in reaction. They follow so closely upon one another that there is no discerning one from the other. When this meditation has been practiced for a long time, memory, the receptacle of all impressions, becomes purified, and we are able clearly to distinguish them from one another. This is called nirvitarka, concentration without question. Verse 44. By this process, the concentrations with discrimination and without discrimination, whose objects are finer, are also explained. In the two previous verses are explained the samadhi with discrimination and the samadhi without discrimination, in which objects are finer. Verse 45. The finer objects end with the pradhana. The gross objects are only the elements and everything manufactured out of them. The fine objects begin with the tanmatras, or fine particles. The category of fine objects includes the organs, the mind, egoism, and the mind stuff, which is the cause of manifestation. It also includes prakriti, or nature, and the unmanifest state called pradhana, in which the materials of sattva, rajas, and tamas are in equilibrium. The purusha alone is accepted from this definition. Verse 46. These concentrations are with seed. These do not destroy the seeds of past actions, and thus cannot give liberation. But what they bring to the yogi is stated in the following aphorism. Verse 47. The concentration without discrimination being purified, the chitta becomes firmly fixed. Verse 48. The knowledge in that is called filled with truth. The next aphorism will explain this. Verse 49. The knowledge that is gained from testimony and inference is about common objects. That from the samadhi just mentioned is of a much higher order, being able to penetrate where inference and testimony cannot go. The idea is that we have to get our knowledge of ordinary objects by direct perception and by inference therefrom, and from testimony of people who are competent. By people who are competent, the yogis always mean the rishis, or the seers of the thoughts recorded in the scriptures, the Vedas. According to them, the only proof of the scriptures is that they were the testimony of competent persons. Yet, they say the scriptures cannot take us to realization. We can read all the Vedas and yet will not realize anything. But when we practice their teachings, then we attain to that state which realizes what the scriptures say, which penetrates where neither reason nor perception nor inference can go, and where the testimony of others cannot avail. This is what is meant by the aphorism. Realization is real religion. All the rest is only preparation. Hearing lectures, or reading books, or reasoning is merely preparing the ground. It is not religion. Intellectual assent and intellectual dissent are not religion. The central idea of the yogis is that just as we come in direct contact with objects of the senses, so religion, even, can be directly perceived in a far more intense sense. The truths of religion, as God and soul, cannot be perceived by the external senses. I cannot see God with my eyes, nor can I touch him with my hands, and we also know that neither can we reason beyond the senses. Reason leaves us at a point quite indecisive. We may reason all our lives, as the world has been doing for thousands of years, and the result is that we find we are incompetent to prove or disprove the facts of religion. What we perceive directly we take as the basis, and upon that basis we reason. So it is obvious that reasoning has to run within these bounds of perception. It can never go beyond. The whole scope of realization, therefore, is beyond sense perception. The yogis say that man can go beyond his direct sense perception and beyond his reason also. Man has in him the faculty, the power of transcending his intellect even, a power which is in every being, every creature. By the practice of yoga, that power is aroused, and then man transcends the ordinary limits of reason and directly perceives things which are beyond all reason. Verse 50. The resulting impression from this samadhi obstructs all other impressions. We have seen in the foregoing aphorism that the only way of attaining to that superconsciousness is by concentration, and we have also seen that what hindered the mind from concentration are the past samskaras, or impressions. All of you have observed that when you are trying to concentrate your mind, your thoughts wander. When you are trying to think of God, that is the very time these samskaras appear. At other times, they are not so active, but when you want them not, they are sure to be there, trying their best to crowd in your mind. Why should that be so? Why should they be much more potent at the time of concentration? It is because you are repressing them, and they react with all their force. At other times, they do not react. How countless these old past impressions must be, all lodged somewhere in the chitta, ready, waiting like tigers to jump up. These have to be suppressed, that the one idea which we want may arise, to the exclusion of the others. Instead, they are all struggling to come up at the same time. These are the various powers of the samskaras in hindering concentration of the mind. So this samadhi, which has just been given, is the best to be practiced on account of its power of suppressing the samskaras. The samskara which will be raised by this sort of concentration will be so powerful that it will hinder the action of the others and hold them in check. Verse 51. By the restraint of even this impression, which obstructs all other impressions, all being restrained, comes the seedless samadhi. You remember that our goal is to perceive the soul itself. We cannot perceive the soul because it has got mingled up with nature, with the mind, with the body. The ignorant man thinks his body is the soul. The learned man thinks his mind is the soul. But both of them are mistaken. What makes the soul get mingled up with all this? Different waves in the chitta rise and cover the soul. We only see a little reflection of the soul through these waves. So, if the wave is one of anger, we see the soul as angry. I am angry, one says. If it is one of love, we see ourselves reflected in that wave and say we are loving. If that wave is one of weakness and the soul is reflected in it, we think we are weak. These various ideas come from these impressions, these samskaras covering the soul. The real nature of the soul is not perceived as long as there is one single wave in the lake of the chitta. This real nature will never be perceived until all the waves have subsided. So, first, Patanjali teaches us the meaning of these waves. Secondly, the best way to repress them. And thirdly, how to make one wave so strong as to suppress all other waves, fire eating fire, as it were. When only one remains, it will be easy to suppress that also, and when that is gone, this samadhi or concentration is called seedless. It leaves nothing, and the soul is manifested just as it is, in its own glory. Then alone we know that the soul is not a compound. It is the only eternal simple in the universe, and as such, it cannot be born, it cannot die. It is immortal, indestructible, the ever-living essence of intelligence.